When she went to the basement, she realized what had happened.
It's beyond her worst nightmare.
This is what we call a heater case. So it was all hands on deck.
At this point, they don't know what the killer's intentions are.
I want you to do this, and here's the means.
And then he cleaned up the blood so that he could wait for another victim.
I was prepared to shoot him if he came out of that car.
There was basically a kill list of targets.
I was on that list. That was easily the scariest thing that ever happened in my life.
It was mind-boggling.
People, we were drawn to this story because it tears at the very fabric of the judicial system in this country. And when something or someone threatens the institutions of our country, we're all victims. Michael and Joan Lefkow are pillars of the legal community in Chicago, Illinois. They both firmly believe in justice and the judicial system.
My name is Douglas Seckham, and I'm a special agent for the FBI. Judge Lefkow is a U.S. federal district judge. She's assigned to the 7th Circuit here in Chicago.
My name is Kim Woodruff, and I'm the United States Marshal for the Northern District of Illinois. And I was in charge of Judge Lefkow's protection. Judge Lefkow is a very intelligent person, and she is a very compassionate individual.
Judge Lefkow's husband, Michael Lefkow, he was a fine lawyer.
Michael Lefkow had been a high-profile attorney, handled some civil rights cases, ran for judge.
He's a very, very bright guy.
In 2005, they're both in their 60s, and neither one of them has plans to slow down. But their story began back in 1965.
Michael and Joan met at the library at Wheaton College. It was Good Friday in 1965. She was a senior in the undergraduate program, and he was a law student at nearby Northwestern Law School. Joan was a Kansas farm girl who'd grown up attending a one-room schoolhouse. Michael was a well-traveled law scholar. To say they were different would have been an understatement.
Michael and Joan finally graduate with law degrees, and before they knew it, they'd been dating for 10 years. They decided to make it official in 1975 in a small church in the mountains of Colorado.
And 2 years later, in 1977, they welcomed their first daughter into the world. And then in November of 1982, Joan is appointed a U.S. magistrate judge.
In 1984, when their third daughter was born, Michael opened up his own law practice, and the family moved into a Chicago neighborhood called Edgewater.
Edgewater is one of the nicer neighborhoods in Chicago, very low crime. The eastern border of Edgewater is Lake Michigan, so it's got beaches and the lake, and it's really a nice section of town.
In the years following, Michael and Joan had their fourth daughter. They named her Meg. The couple made sure to keep their daughters well-grounded. Joan was home almost every night to make dinner, and Michael always drove the girls to ballet lessons and choir practice or birthday parties.
In the late 90s, President Bill Clinton was filling federal judge vacancies. He was appointing a lot of female candidates.
And in the year 2000, Joan Lefkow, after numerous applications, got something she'd wanted for years. On September 7th, 2000, Joan was appointed U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois.
She was now a federal appeals judge, and that's a really big deal.
As fate would have it, Judge Lefkow's courthouse is right across the street from Michael's one-room law office.
In 2002, Michael aspires to put on the black robe, and he runs for a local judgeship. But unfortunately, his run was unsuccessful.
In January 2005, life throws them another curveball. Joan's 89-year-old mother, Donna, moves in with them. With 3 of their daughters now grown and moved out of the house, that makes it 4 living in their Edgewater residence.
On February 28th, 2005, the morning is as chaotic as most mornings. Meg grabs her backpack and a piece of toast, and she heads out the door for school. Meanwhile, Michael is working from home because he's had ankle surgery, and Joan and Michael kiss their goodbyes, and the judge walks out the door for work.
It's a typically cold Chicago day, and the temperatures dip. During the afternoon, Joan tries calling her husband at home a couple of times, but she gets no answer.
She had tried calling her husband 2 or 3 times, both on his cell and in the house phone, and didn't get an answer. And she says that was very unusual. She said if she ever called her husband and he didn't answer, he would call her right back and within a couple minutes, and that didn't occur.
Judge Lefkoe had her normal docket load in the courthouse, and then I believe she drove herself home.
It was 6 o'clock in late February, so it was still getting dark at that time.
So she walks in, and she doesn't see her mom at her usual reading nook.
She was a little concerned and went upstairs, and lights were on and things like that.
The judge calls out, but she doesn't get a response from her husband or her mother. So she goes down to the basement where Michael has his home office.
When she went to the basement, she realized what had happened. Judge Lefkoe found 2 bodies in the basement.
It's beyond her worst nightmare. Her husband is lying face down on the floor. Her mother lying near him, face up, in a pool of blood.
Judge Lefkoe's mother and husband had been murdered.
She called 911, so uniformed officers were the first ones to respond. They saw Judge Lefkoe sitting on the front porch.
It was a highly emotionally charged time for her. I mean, she had just lost her mother and her husband, and still not knowing what happened, who caused it, who did this.
The first responding officers begin to secure the crime scene, and at this point, there's very little known about the crime.
Was it directed at her? Was it directed at others? We didn't know at the time.
We had a murder of 2 people in Judge Lefkoe's house, and that's all we knew.
It's February 28th, 2005, and federal judge Joan Lefkoe has just returned to her Chicago home to find her husband and mother murdered. Taking all precautions, the U.S. Marshals rushed the judge to a safe house.
Judge Lefkoe's protection was around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until we figured out what was the threat coming from.
Once the judge and her daughter are secured in a safe location, law enforcement begins the investigation of the crime scene itself, the Lefkoe family home.
Chicago Police Department is initially on the scene. They're investigating with their forensics people, but because it is a federal judge that's involved, the FBI brings their evidence response team in as well.
The crime scene was primarily in the basement of the house. They had a finished basement.
I'm Phil Klein. I was the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department. The scene was what we call pristine. In other words, the scene was the way that the offender or offenders left it. Both bodies were found laying in the office. Both had 2 gunshot wounds to the head.
We found cartridge cases that were on the floor of the basement from a .22 caliber pistol, There was a lot of blood on the floor. However, the hallway that connects all these rooms, it was clean. We have a leucocrystal violet. You spray this and you'll start getting a purplish hue if it finds traces of blood. If we spray it in the hallway, we could see the stains were developing and they look purple, and you could see the striation marks from perhaps a sponge or a rag of some sort. It appears somebody tried to clean that up.
There also was a cigarette butt that was found in the kitchen sink.
Considering that no one in the family smokes, the cigarette butt seems promising. Investigators also find another item that has a lot of forensic potential.
One thing we noticed was a 12-pack of pale ale sitting on the floor next to the furnace, and a beer bottle that was sitting on a windowsill that somebody had drank beer out of. And so we called the marshals and had them ask Judge Lefkow about this 12-pack of beer. The judge told us that they had a party either the night before and they had a 12-pack left over. It had not been opened. That was key. We thought maybe this is something that the killer did. You figured you just shot 2 people. You may have to calm your nerves a little bit. At that point, we took the bottle, we swabbed it for DNA and preserved the fingerprints that were on it.
While the forensic team collects evidence and sends samples out for DNA and fingerprint testing, the 3 older Lefkow daughters come home. They want to be with their younger sister Meg and their mother Joan, who is distraught.
All this was emotionally weighing on her, and I talked with her during the initial process, and you could tell she would have moments of doing very well and other times where she was emotional. I can't imagine a person having to go through this, but it was a very challenging time for her.
The judge and her 4 daughters are now on lockdown at an undisclosed location. Meanwhile, the various branches of law enforcement are gathering their forces.
The Chicago Police Department, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshal Service form a task force to investigate the murders.
We set up a command post, and the FBI brought a lot of equipment in, and we paired Chicago police detectives with FBI agents. So when they'd go out on a lead, it would be an FBI agent and a Chicago police officer.
This is a challenging case for the task force because at this point, they don't know what the killer or killer's intentions are.
My name's Robert Grant. I'm the former special agent in charge of the FBI here in Chicago. So we had to determine the motives behind the murders and assess how we're going to investigate this. This could have been a burglary gone bad.
There was nothing missing from the house. I mean, if somebody was going to come in and do a burglary, they would go through drawers at least looking for jewelry, cash, take TVs or anything, and none of that was done in this case.
If robbery was not the motive, then it was most likely a targeted attack. But who was the target? Was it Michael, or Donna, or the judge herself? Investigators need to get answers.
What do we know about the 2 deceased, the relationships they had outside that house or inside that house? Who around her husband or her mother might have represented a potential risk?
Investigators are pretty confident that they can eliminate Judge Lefkow's 89-year-old mother, Donna, as a target. Donna grew up on a farm in rural Kansas as a fundamental Baptist, and she quit school in the 8th grade to help her family on the farm. When she wasn't doing chores, she was reading books and learning everything she could.
Donna had lost her husband in 1977, and she'd been living independently on her own until recently, when she moved in with her daughter. She's an extraordinary woman, but she is not a murder target.
Investigators turn their attention to Michael.
Was it something directed at him because he was the victim? Their address was not that hard to find because of Michael running for public office.
It's possible that when Michael ran for public office in 2002, he might have made himself a public target.
Or was it something directed at the judge?
If the judge herself was the target, the list of people with grievances would be fairly long.
First, we go through Judge Lefkoe's docket and look for people who might have had an outcome on which they were not happy.
We had agents and police officers looking at all Judge Lefkoe's cases for the last couple of years. So they were going through the docket and saying what happened, what was the outcome.
While agents review the judge's past caseload, the task force conducts a canvass of the neighborhood.
During the canvass, detectives talked to a church administrator from one church and a pastor from another church, and both of them described a red car with two guys in it, said they were smoking and drinking a can of Coke. So the detectives had them show where that car had been parked, and sure enough, there was cigarette butts and a can of Coke there. So we had the crime lab recover that, and they did a composite of the two people that were seen in the red car, and that was put out to the media.
Investigators also interview Judge Lefkoe, and they ask her if she can think of anyone in her past who might want to kill her.
She had 3 cases that she named. That one was a gang leader, the other one was an armed robber that she thought he was very scary, and then Matt Hale.
Matt Hale was infamous in Chicago for being a white supremacist leader, but he was even more infamous for his relationship with Judge Lefkoe.
He was convicted of soliciting someone to murder Judge Lefkoe.
In 2005, in Chicago, Illinois, federal judge Joan Lefkoe's husband and mother have been murdered. And law enforcement agencies are well aware of one individual who was recently convicted of plotting to kill the judge.
Matt Hale is a native of Illinois, a alleged lawyer who could not get his law license because he espoused some pretty hateful ideas.
He's one of these white supremacist type people. He was clearly of a mindset that is disagreeable to many, including myself.
He was the head of what was at that time called the World Church of the Creator, and he was the principal religious leader of that organization. It's a white supremacist, hate-filled group.
Matt Hale's organization came to the forefront of national news in the summer of 1999 because of one 19-year-old member, Benjamin Nathaniel Smith.
Benjamin Smith was a member of the World Church of the Creator.
This is not a game that we're playing. I mean, this is a life or death struggle for the future of our race.
Smith went on a shooting spree in 2 states, Illinois and Indiana. He ended up, during this shooting spree, wounding 8 people, killing 2 people, and then ultimately taking his own life.
The 1999 murders put the World Church of the Creator on the radar of a lot of people, including a church of the same name.
The name World Church of the Creator, it also belonged to another church in Oregon in which they claimed that they had the trademark to it.
They didn't want their name being associated with a racist group. So in 2002, they'd sued in federal court to enjoin Matthew Hale from using the trademark name World Church of the Creator.
And Judge Lefkoe ultimately decided against Matt Hale and against his organization, and then told them to cease and desist using Church of the Creator.
Additionally, Judge Lefkoe ordered that Matt Hale and his organization be fined $1,000 for every day they didn't change the name of their group. This was something Matt Hale took personally.
He uses his influence to stir up his followers to take action against those involved.
He writes that Judge Lefkoe's ruling, in effect, puts us in a state of war against this federal judge.
The church's followers made threats against Judge Lefkoe online, which is a red flag.
Is all of a sudden, are we having open season on judges?
Matt Hale posts photos of the Lefkoe family online. He even goes so far as to post Judge Lefkoe's home address.
It sort of basically says, I want you to do this, and here is the means, and I'll make it as easy as possible.
But there is something Hale and his supporters didn't know at the time.
The FBI had an informant that was in his organization.
Ever since the Benjamin Smith shootings a few years earlier, the FBI had taken a real interest in Hale's organization. And they got close to the man who was the head of Hale's security force.
The FBI informant recorded a conversation, and details of that conversation revealed Matt Hale's identification of Judge Lefkoe as a legitimate target.
This individual went to the FBI and said, look, I've been approached by Matthew Hale, and he wants me to kill a federal judge.
The FBI decides they don't want to take any chances. And in January of 2003, before any actual attacks are attempted, they arrest Hale and charge him with trying to arrange Lefkoe's murder.
During Hale's criminal proceedings, Judge Lefkoe and her family are under the protection of the U.S. Marshal Service. They surround the family's house with cameras and agents. In April of 2004, after a 3-week trial, Hale was found guilty of solicitation of murder. In the following months, while Hale awaited sentencing, the protective details seemed less and less necessary.
So she released the security she had from the Matt Hale incident.
Then, about a year later, this murder happened of Judge Lefkoe's husband and mother, but Matthew Hale was still in Marshal Service custody at the Bureau of Prisons here in Chicago. It's called the MCC.
He was awaiting sentencing on threatening Judge Lefkoe.
Investigators question Hale, and he insists that neither he nor any of his supporters from his organization had any role in the murders.
Now, the question would be whether or not he had communicated or indirectly communicated something to his followers to encourage them to continue on with the threat against Judge Lefkoe.
The task force reviews months and months of Hale's prison mail correspondence.
Looking at his mail and visitors' logs for the past several months, investigators can tell that there is one person that Hale has been getting a lot of attention from. It's a woman named Kathleen. Kathleen has been sending him postcards every other day, and they've been exchanging long letters once or twice a week.
She lives in a Chicago suburb, and within 24 hours of the murder, task force agents are questioning her at her home.
I believe she used the word that she was a separatist, not a white supremacist, and she certainly had no ill will toward Judge Lefkoe. Certain records were recovered from her, copies of letters from him. Her computer was taken through a court order, and it was searched to see if she had any involvement in the events involving Judge Lefkoe. She was quite annoyed at law enforcement, I would say.
The agents ask her about her whereabouts earlier in the week, on the day of the murders. And they ask her about her car, which is red, like the one reportedly seen in the neighborhood on the day of the murders.
But she has an alibi, and her car is the wrong make and model. As agents review Kathleen's statements and correspondence, the task force begins to widen their net.
We still had to look at the Church of the World Creator. Hale had a lot of followers, and we had to eliminate those people. And a lot of them had records and could have the background to do something like this.
We ended up conducting over 830 leads, 360 interviews. So it was a massive undertaking.
What we did discover during the course of interviewing all of Matt Hale's supporters, a lot of people in hate groups are big talkers and not much else. Was there talk about it? Absolutely. But there was no strong feeling amongst our investigators that anybody in that group was behind this murder.
5 days into the investigation, the family attends the funeral for Michael in Chicago, led by the matriarch of the family herself, Joan.
Michael's funeral is well attended by family and friends and hundreds in the local and national legal community. The pastor reminds people of why Michael was special. Some would say that he became a lawyer for the best reason, and that's for justice.
He fought for the underprivileged, putting principles above pay. He even argued 2 cases before the Supreme Court.
The mayor and myself, the head of the FBI, the U.S. attorney, went to the funeral.
At that point, I didn't want them to lose faith. The question was, where do we go from here in the investigation?
After about 9 days, the tests come back for the cigarette butt that was found in the kitchen sink. It does have DNA on it, but the test gives investigators mixed results.
You can get DNA at a crime scene, but you have to have known DNA to compare it to. They did not get a kit, which means the DNA on that cigarette, whoever left it, it had not been convicted. Their DNA was not in the system yet.
The DNA also doesn't match any of the family's DNA samples. In addition, the results from the 2 suspects in the red car are now available.
The evidence that was recovered outside the red car was compared to the evidence in the house, and it didn't match.
But the results from the beer bottle proved to be more useful.
The strongest piece of evidence was that beer bottle, hands down. And I received a call from the deputy director of the lab saying, "You nailed it. We have a fingerprint of a guy named Bart Ross on that beer bottle."
We went through people with grievances in the court system. He was on that list.
Bart Ross had a case before Judge Lefkow. And at that point, the search was on for Bart Ross.
Michael Lefkow and his mother-in-law, Donna Humphrey, have been murdered in their Chicago home. 10 days have elapsed, and the investigation is about to take a dramatic turn. Just 90 miles to the north, in West Allis, Wisconsin.
I'm Sergeant Rick Orlowski from the City of West Allis, Wisconsin Police Department. I was a patrolman back in 2005. The City of West Allis is a community of 60,000 plus people, borders Milwaukee on 3 sides.
It's March 9th, 2005, and it's just another day on the job for patrolman Rick Orlowski.
So around 5 o'clock-ish, I was down in the area of 67th and Rogers, and I noted that there was a minivan parked. It was brown with like the wood paneling. You don't get a lot of traffic through there unless you're local. And I noticed that it had Illinois license plates, but I kind of just filed it in the back of my head.
Officer Orlowski got called away on another call, and when he came back, the van was still there.
So I passed him because I wanted to get a look into the car. So I was just one occupant.
And then the van made a U-turn and started to leave.
So when I in turn had to make a U-turn, and I started following. When he got up to the stop sign at 71st and Rogers, I noted that there was a brake light out. So I'm like, well, I made a traffic violation right there. So I throw the emergency lights on. He actually stopped in the middle of the road. He didn't pull over to the right. I approached on the driver's side, and when I got up to the frame right before the window, he didn't roll down the window, so I went to go to knock on it, and then one single gunshot round went off through the window. I could feel the concussion from it and a little bit of glass that broke away from the window. It scared me. It took me a second to just process. Did that guy just shoot at me, or what's going on here? So I relayed to the other squads in the area, and I yelled, "Shots fired." I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. I mean, it took me a second to kind of collect my thoughts. I was prepared to shoot him if he came out of that car. In probably a minute or two, the other officers got there. We got some ballistic shields from the SWAT team and a couple SWAT operators up there. They went up with a shield and a team of like 2 or 3 guys, and they popped the passenger window of the vehicle. They hailed police, put down the gun. There was no response. At that point, you could see blood on the windshield, the blood on his head, and down on the body, and they could tell that he had shot himself in the head.
Once the initial danger is over, the West Allis police secure the scene and bring in their crime scene unit.
When he shot himself through the right temple, went all the way through the left temple, and then out the driver's window, and it left a perfect bullet hole. He could have shot me. There was a lanyard with a gun sitting right here in his chest. So the gun was actually still tied around his neck at that point. It was a 9mm handgun.
Police remove the gun from around the man's neck and notice a wallet is hanging around his neck on the lanyard.
Among other things, it contains the man's driver's license and social security card.
His name was Bart Ross.
He was a smaller man, 5'6" or 5'7". He was slight. He was fairly skinny. He had a very odd look about him.
The wallet also contains a note that reads, "Everything is explained in papers in roller bag." Police look in the roller bag in the van and discover another note.
They held the scene then and notified the U.S. Marshals about what was going on.
All of a sudden, we get called that a guy just shot himself up in West Dallas, Wisconsin, and he has a letter talking about the Lefkow case. So we immediately sent agents and detectives up there.
Immediately, they take a look at the man's supposed suicide note.
The letter itself essentially was a note where he disclosed that he had murdered Judge Lefkow's family members.
If you look at his letter, it's rambling and it's not from a sane person.
His suicide note declares Judge Lefkow as his prime target. He writes, quote, "I regret killing husband and mother of Judge Lefkow, as much as I regret that I have to die."
He wrote that he had shot them both once and then put a second shot into each of them, for he said to end their suffering.
He revealed details that only the murderer would know about.
He's also the man whose fingerprints were identified just hours before from the beer bottle found at the crime scene.
Bart Ross was on Judge Lefkow's docket list when he committed his suicide. And in fact, it was that day they were going to go out and try and find him.
The van was impounded, and we went through it. With the evidence response team of the FBI, they went through every piece of paper, every nook and cranny.
It appeared like he was living out of his van. He had a bunch of clothes in his van. They located boxes of .22 caliber ammo in the back.
The van contains about 300 rounds of .22 caliber bullets, the same caliber that killed Michael and Donna. That, combined with a written confession, is almost a slam dunk, but investigators still need to place him at the scene of the crime.
They took swabs and fingerprints from Bart Ross and came right back to Chicago, and the state police got that DNA done in like 8 hours, which was unheard of at that time, and matched it up to the cigarette butts and the beer bottles, so that there's physical evidence tying him to the scene.
It would seem that the task force got their man. But there's one item above all others that still troubles investigators.
He had a list of 25 names there of doctors, lawyers, and judges that he wanted to kill.
When he killed himself, he was within 15 miles of another federal judge's home address.
So was Judge Lefkow his only target? No. Judge Lefkow was his first target.
Law enforcement needs to ask, why did he do this? And did he act alone?
The question at that point was, were there other people knowledgeable about Bart Ross's activities? Were there other conspirators out there?
A random traffic stop in Wisconsin gives investigators the name of Michael and Donna's killer, Bart Ross. He's committed suicide, but he left behind basically a kill list of targets. Law enforcement immediately contacts each name on the list.
My name is Matt Henderson. I'm an attorney at Hinshaw and Culbertson in Chicago. I was summoned downstairs by the Joint Task Force of the FBI and the Chicago Police, and they indicated that there were a number of people who he intended to kill. And in fact, I was on that list. I was on someone's hit list. That was easily the scariest thing that ever happened to me in my life.
The question at that point was, were there other people? We had to find out whether or not he was a lone gunman.
In order to find out if Ross had help, investigators need to figure out who he was and why he wanted the judge dead. Police begin to find answers in the stacks and stacks of legal documents in Ross's van.
He brought a medical negligence case in the Circuit Court of Cook County against the physicians who treated him, and he was representing himself in that case.
Ross didn't have a wife or any children, but investigators begin to develop an idea of who he was and what he was about.
Bart Ross was an engineer. He was a Polish immigrant that came to this country, so he was fingerprinted, and that's why he was in the system.
Once he got here, he had a job as an electrician. He owned a home up on the north side of Chicago and had 3 automobiles. So it was really the story of an immigrant who did well coming here.
In the 1990s, he had sought treatment from University of Chicago at Illinois for the cancer. And initially, they put it into remission, but then it came back. And they had to do some surgery. That surgery caused part of his jawbone to be removed.
He believed that surgery left him disfigured.
He thought somebody should be held accountable for that, primarily the doctors and the hospitals involved. And so he filed civil suits.
As time went on, Ross was denied motions and rulings, but he wouldn't quit. He continued with appeal after appeal, but he didn't get much support in his efforts.
He'd searched the country and had consulted with some 200 doctors and 100 lawyers, trying to find somebody to help him pursue his case.
Pretty much they shut the door on him, basically saying, you don't have a case.
What he was claiming was strange and got more and more bizarre as the case progressed.
He was becoming more and more paranoid in this process.
He alleged a bizarre conspiracy, claiming that the judges and the lawyers in the federal case had all conspired against him. He had many references in his pleadings to Nazi doctors' experiments on individuals during the Holocaust. He had references to Al-Qaeda. He had even written a long, rambling letter to President Bush in 2001.
In 2004, the case finally got to Judge Lefkoe's court.
And she was very sympathetic to Mr. Ross. She'd indicated that, I can't imagine the suffering that you've endured in your life, and I sincerely regret that the law doesn't afford you any remedy under these circumstances. But Judge Lefkoe ultimately dismissed the case.
Bart Ross's obsession caused him to exhaust his bank savings, get evicted from his house, and eventually move into his van.
Suddenly it becomes, I think violence will allow me to regain control of my life where I've lost control. And it's a control issue. And then the idea of violence overtakes him.
Police discovered that Ross had been evicted from his rental house just 3 weeks before the murders, and that some of his possessions are still there.
My team was called in to do a search warrant on Bart Ross's house here in Chicago. And one of the most interesting things that we found was in his basement.
We discovered that Bart Ross actually had made a shooting range in his basement.
He was experimenting with different types of silencers and shooting into phone books that were taped together to test it out.
The silencer explains why no one in the Lefkoe's neighborhood reported hearing gunshots that day. But that was not all they discovered.
There were several .22 caliber shell casings on the ground. The bullets that were recovered during the autopsy matched the bullets that we found in his house where he was doing all his test fires.
Prior to him committing suicide, he must have dumped the .22 gun somewhere, and it was never found.
The police have seemingly stepped into the home of a madman. But besides all the physical evidence, one thing supersedes all else.
There was no evidence to show that he had anyone else with him. We thought he acted alone. I was relieved, and I was really proud of the police officers and the federal agents that all worked together to get this guy.
Police are sure Ross was acting alone, and they get an idea of how the Lefkoe murders happened from the details in his letters.
If you look at his letter, he broke into the furnace room somewhere 3 to 4:30 in the morning, and that's where he waited. That's while everybody was upstairs.
family wakes up, goes about their morning routine, and Judge Lefkoe leaves for work.
And Judge Lefkoe's husband went into the basement. I think Ross felt he was going to be discovered, and that's when that murder occurs.
And then, after hearing the shots, Donna Humphrey investigated. And that's when she was shot.
And then he cleaned up the blood so that he could wait for another victim. I think he was trying to draw people in.
It is fortunate that no one else was killed. According to his letters, after the second murder, Ross admits that he had time to think about life and death. He stayed in the house until 1:15 p.m. and then decided to leave.
When law enforcement delivers the news about Ross and his suicide to Judge Lefkoe, she's in Colorado getting ready for her mother's funeral. She's relieved that the investigation is over, but the events have changed her life in ways that cannot be repaired.
While Judge Lefkoe and her siblings are going through their mother's belongings, they discover a lot of poems that she'd written over the years, unbeknownst to them. In their mother's memory, they published them in a book.
She published it. I have it. I think it was a way of just keeping that connection with her mother. They were very close.
There's a poem she'd written called To My Children, and it talks about how she'd like to be remembered. She says, "Remember me with kindness. I will be content."
Maybe there's no better way to sum up Michael Lefkoe's philosophy on life than the quote from Don Quixote he had hanging in his office. It says, "The man who fights for his ideals is the man who is alive." Some people might have run away from an ordeal like this, and I don't think anyone would blame them. But Judge Lefkoe continues with her and her husband Michael's crusade for justice.
She's still on the bench. I spoke to her very recently, and she's reducing her caseload some. She has a number of grandchildren, but she's still serving this nation.